The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains of Eleonora Mikhailovna's small but cozy apartment. At 72, Eleonora had long since settled into her routines. She was up before 7, dressed by 8, and out the door with her shopping bag in hand. Her days were structured, predictable, and she liked them that way. But that morning, the air felt heavy. Something was missing. When she stepped out into the hallway, the door across from hers stood ajar. A quiet hush had fallen over the usually cheerful building. It was then she learned the news. Maria Petrovna, her longtime neighbor and friend, had passed away in the early hours. It was a blow. Eleonora and Maria had shared countless cups of tea, exchanged recipes for pickled mushrooms and honey cakes, and often giggled over stories from their youth. They had grocery shopped together, talked politics on the bench outside, and even made New Year's resolutions they never kept. Maria's sudden departure felt like a crack in Eleonora's world. The funeral was small and somber, held under a pale sky. Eleonora sat among a dozen familiar faces, most of them older, most of them silent. She clutched her scarf tightly around her shoulders, the chill in her bones more from grief than from the breeze. As the ceremony drew to a close, Eleonora wandered toward the gate, where two women stood whispering. One wore a white coat, a doctor, perhaps, and the other, Maria's niece, looked distraught. She was fine just the night before, the niece said, dabbing at her eyes. She had dinner, even called me to say goodnight. The doctor nodded solemnly. It happens, especially at this age, but you know, it might have been preventable. Some seniors stand up too quickly in the morning. Blood pressure drops, they faint, fall, it only takes a moment. Eleonora froze. She had a bruise on her temple, the doctor continued. Looks like she might have hit her head in the bathroom. Orthostatic hypotension, most likely. It's more common than people think. Orthostatic what? Eleonora's heart thumped. She took a step back, not wanting to hear more, but unable to forget what she just overheard. All that talk about blood pressure, fainting, falling, it was terrifying. And so ordinary, so avoidable, according to the doctor. That night, Eleonora lay in bed unable to sleep. Maria, gone, just like that. She thought back to their last conversation, how Maria had joked about her cat knocking over the sugar bowl again. How full of life she'd been. And yet, was it possible that something as simple as how one rises from bed could be a matter of life or death? Eleonora turned onto her side and stared at the ceiling. A slow resolve began to build in her chest. Tomorrow morning, she would do things differently. And maybe, just maybe, that change could save her life. The next morning, Eleonora didn't leap out of bed as usual. She lay still, eyes open, recalling the words she'd overheard at the funeral. Orthostatic hypotension. The term echoed in her head like a warning bell. She reached over to the nightstand, pulled on her glasses, and sat up slowly, letting her feet dangle over the edge of the bed. Her body felt a bit stiff, but she resisted the urge to push herself upright. Instead, she stayed seated, waiting a full minute. Then another. Her heart was steady, her vision clear. When she finally stood up, she did so with care, first on one foot, then the other, like balancing on the icy sidewalks in winter. And to her surprise, she felt better. Not dizzy, not rushed, just calm. That afternoon, she walked to the local clinic. The receptionist smiled when she saw her. Dr. Burovsky is free in 10 minutes. You're lucky. She nodded and took a seat. When her turn came, the old physician looked up from his desk, adjusting his spectacles. Eleonora Mikhailovna, always a pleasure. What brings you in today? She explained everything, Maria's death, the doctor's words at the cemetery, and her own fears about her morning habits. Dr. Burovsky listened attentively, then gave a small nod. You're absolutely right to be concerned. Orthostatic hypotension is quite common in older adults. When we rise too quickly, gravity pulls blood down into the legs and the brain doesn't get enough oxygen. That leads to dizziness, or worse, a fall. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small booklet. Inside were illustrated steps for safe morning rising. Lie in bed for a minute after waking, he read aloud, tapping the page. Then sit up slowly, let your feet hang for a bit. Rotate your ankles, move your toes, gently stretch. Then, and only then, stand. Eleonora absorbed every word. And hydration, he added, is crucial. Dehydration can make symptoms worse. She thanked him sincerely and left the clinic clutching the booklet like a precious artifact. That evening, she reread the instructions at least 3 times. It wasn't rocket science. In fact, it was embarrassingly simple. But simple things she was learning could be powerful. The next morning, her new ritual began in full. She woke, took 3 deep breaths and smiled. No more jumping up like a jack-in-the-box. She stretched her hands above her head, circled her feet in lazy loops, and sat up slowly. When she stood, there was no wave of dizziness, no stumbling toward the dresser for balance. Just steady, grounded movement. Over the following days, she practiced this method with religious devotion. It became almost meditative, her private moment of grace before the noise of the day. And with each passing morning, she felt a subtle shift. More clarity, less fatigue, a strange and welcome sense of control. One afternoon, while knitting in the courtyard, Eleonora watched other neighbors shuffle past, some sprightly, some sluggish. She wondered, how many of them still jump out of bed without thinking? How many could be at risk without knowing it? An idea was forming. It was still vague, fragile as a soap bubble, but it shimmered with purpose. Perhaps Maria's death wouldn't be in vain. Perhaps it could inspire something bigger. It was on a Tuesday morning, while stirring her usual cup of strong black tea, that Eleonora had her next realization. She hadn't had a drop of water yet. In fact, now that she thought about it, she rarely drank water in the mornings at all. Her day always began with that dark, steaming brew, no sugar, no milk, just bitter comfort. But wasn't that a little odd? Especially considering what the doctor had told her about hydration and morning dizziness. She glanced at the booklet again. One line stood out. Start your day with a glass of water to help blood circulation and brain function. Feeling a twinge of guilt, she put the teacup down and went to the kitchen. The glass of water she poured looked plain and unexciting. Still, she sipped it slowly, letting the coolness fill her mouth. It wasn't the comforting warmth of tea, but it was refreshing. For the next few days, she made it her goal, 1 full glass of water within 10 minutes of waking. Then, only then, could she enjoy her tea. At first, it felt forced, almost mechanical. But something curious began to happen. She noticed her morning headaches, ones she had always blamed on bad sleep or the neighbor's dog barking, had disappeared. Her digestion improved. Her lips weren't so dry. And she felt oddly energized, as if her body had been asking for this all along. By the end of the week, the water wasn't a task, it was a reward. Encouraged by the change, Eleonora began to read more. She dug through health brochures at the clinic, watched short wellness videos on her niece's old tablet, and even asked the young pharmacist in the corner store about hydration tips. The consensus was clear. Dehydration in older adults was common, often unnoticed, and surprisingly dangerous. One evening, while watching the news, she saw a short segment about seniors in Japan who practiced water therapy, drinking 2 glasses of water upon waking to aid circulation and metabolism. 2 glasses, she muttered aloud, half in awe, half in challenge. Well, why not? The next morning, she went for it. The first glass went down easily. The second, with a slice of lemon, tasted even better. She felt light, alert, almost youthful. By now, Eleonora was keeping a little notebook, logging her new routines. She titled the first page, Morning Ritual. Under it, she listed, wake slowly, sit and stretch in bed, drink water before tea, stand mindfully. Simple steps, but together they felt revolutionary. She began to wonder again about the others in her building. How many, like her, skipped the water and went straight to tea or coffee? How many complained of morning fatigue, unaware they were starting the day in a state of dehydration? That same day, she bumped into Nikolai Ivanovich in the elevator. A retired geography teacher with kind eyes and a rather permanent frown, he was known for his complaints about indigestion and headaches. Morning, Eleonora Mikhailovna, he said, rubbing his forehead. This humidity, I tell you, it ruins me. She hesitated, then smiled. Maybe you need water, not weather reports. He looked puzzled. She chuckled and stepped out. Maybe it was time to share what she was learning, not just with Nikolai, but with everyone. Knowledge, she was starting to believe, was a form of care, and she had no intention of keeping it to herself. Eleonora didn't have to wait long to put her new mission into action. The very next morning, she found Nikolai Ivanovich sitting alone on the front bench, clutching a thermos and looking visibly uncomfortable. "You again," he grumbled, though not unkindly. "The sun's not even warm, and my stomach's already on fire." Eleonora raised an eyebrow. "Still starting your day with that mystery potion?" "It's coffee," he huffed. "What else?" "Strong. Black. Boiled on the stove, just like in the old days." She sat beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap. "And do you eat anything first?" Nikolai looked at her as if she'd just asked if he flew to work on a broomstick. "Of course not. I drink my coffee, then maybe a slice of bread, if I feel like it." Eleonora nodded slowly, as if examining a patient. "And you still have those stomach pains? The acid? The headaches?" He gave a skeptical shrug. "What does one have to do with the other?" "Everything," she said softly. She told him about what she had learned, how drinking strong coffee on an empty stomach can irritate the lining, increase stomach acid, and worsen symptoms like heartburn, nausea, and digestive trouble. She described how caffeine causes a spike in cortisol, especially harmful when the body hasn't had food or water yet. Nikolai listened with narrowed eyes. "So what do you do? Give up coffee?" "Not at all," she smiled. "I still enjoy my tea, but I drink water first. And I eat something light. Oatmeal, a slice of cheese, maybe a banana. Then, when the body's ready, I enjoy my tea, guilt-free and symptom-free." He didn't answer right away, just stared at his thermos thoughtful. "Maybe I'll try," he muttered. "Not that I'm promising anything." But Eleonora saw the shift. A door had opened. The following morning, she left a small note outside his door. "Try this. 1 glass of water after waking. A light breakfast. Then coffee, just not boiled into tar." A day later, he knocked on her door. "I tried it," he said bluntly. "Didn't die. Didn't burn up inside either." Eleonora grinned. Over the next week, they spoke daily. Nikolai began reporting his symptoms with the seriousness of a lab experiment. Less bloating. No sour taste in the back of his throat. He even joked about putting breakfast before brew on a t-shirt. One afternoon, he surprised her with a small bouquet of lilacs. "For your hydration crusade," he said, looking embarrassed. "You might be onto something." And just like that, Eleonora had her first student. It was a quiet victory, but a meaningful one. She began to notice things more. How other seniors walked stiffly in the mornings, how they complained of fatigue before noon, how many seemed locked into habits simply because that's how it's always been. But she no longer believed in always. She believed in better. And with Nikolai's transformation in motion, she was ready to share more, with more people, in more ways. It was time to move beyond one-on-one advice. It was time to form a community. If anyone in the building had a reputation for being invincible, it was Vladimir Stepanovich. At 78, the former athlete still wore his old track jacket like a badge of honor. Every morning, rain or shine, he was the first one outside, swinging his arms in wide circles, touching his toes, and bouncing on his heels like it was still 1975. He claimed that movement was life, and that slowing down was a shortcut to the grave. But even heroes slip. It happened one frosty morning. Eleonora heard the thud from her open window. She rushed downstairs, heart pounding, to find Vladimir grimacing on the icy sidewalk, one hand gripping his hip. "I'm fine," he insisted, though the pain in his eyes told a different story. The ambulance came. "A hairline fracture," the doctors said. He would recover, but slowly. While recovering at home, Vladimir was less boastful, though no less stubborn. He refused a wheelchair and used a cane only when cornered by the building superintendent. Eleonora decided to pay him a visit. She brought a jar of homemade cranberry compote and a warm blanket stitched with small birds, her own handiwork. "Come to gloat," he grumbled. "Come to share," she said gently. "You're not the first one who thought speed was strength, but maybe slowing down isn't weakness. Maybe it's wisdom." He scoffed, but accepted the compote. Over the next few days, she continued to visit. She told him about Maria, about the dizziness, about hydration, mindful rising, and soft morning stretches. At first, he waved it off. But Eleonora had learned something about men like Vladimir. They didn't like orders. but they didn't mind challenges. "You think you're strong?" she said one day. "Try waking up without jumping out of bed like a teenager. Try listening to your body for once." He narrowed his eyes. "Go on." She demonstrated her bed stretches, ankle circles, shoulder rolls, neck tilts. Movements so gentle they looked like nothing at all, but they worked. "Warm up before standing," she said. "Think of it like training, just slower, smarter." Vladimir agreed, reluctantly, to try it, just for a few days. By the end of the week, he had a new routine, waking up slowly, stretching in bed, drinking a glass of water his granddaughter had placed beside the nightstand. "I still don't like it," he admitted, "but I haven't felt dizzy since. And my joints don't ache so much anymore." Eleonora smiled. "That's not weakness, Vladimir. That's progress." One morning, she found him sitting in the courtyard, sipping tea with Nikolai Ivanovich. They weren't exactly friends, but something unspoken had passed between them. Two stubborn men, each softened by small changes. It was happening. Little by little, Eleonora's quiet campaign was taking shape. Not by preaching, but by planting seeds, not with rules, but with routines. The idea that had started with grief was blossoming into something hopeful, and it was time to give it a name. It was a Sunday afternoon when Eleonora pinned the first note to the building's bulletin board. "Morning ritual, a health circle for seniors. Want to feel more awake, steady, and well? Let's meet this Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the common room." Tea provided. Bring curiosity and an open mind. Him. She didn't expect much. Maybe Nikolai would show up. Maybe Vladimir, if he felt bored enough. But when she walked into the common room on Wednesday, she found 6 people seated around the large table, mugs in hand, eyes curious. She smiled, surprised and delighted. "I didn't think anyone would come," she confessed. "We came for the tea," joked a woman from the 3rd floor, stirring honey into her cup. "But we'll stay if you entertain us." And so, Eleonora began. She told Maria's story, not in sadness, but as a starting point. She spoke about what she'd learned: slow rising, hydration, avoiding coffee on an empty stomach, and gentle stretching before standing. She showed the booklet from the clinic and passed around her handwritten notes. To her surprise, they leaned in, asked questions, shared their own stories. "I'd always get up fast," said Clara Andreevna, a retired seamstress. "I thought the spinning head was just age." "My knees crack when I move," said Yakov Petrovich. "Never thought to warm up in bed." Even the skeptics had something to say. "I still don't see how a glass of water can change anything," muttered a man in the corner. Eleonora didn't argue. She simply replied, "Try it for a week, then tell us." They laughed. The tension broke. At the end of the meeting, she handed out small cards labeled Morning Checklist. Wake up slowly. Sit and breathe. Stretch gently. Drink water. Eat something small. Then tea or coffee if you wish. She even gave everyone a small sticker to mark each successful morning. "It's not a rule," she said, "just a reminder." They agreed to meet once a week. By the 3rd meeting, the group had doubled. By the 4th, there was a waiting list for the tea mugs. People began arriving with stories. "I didn't fall this week. My digestion's better. I actually feel awake before noon." Eleonora listened to every word. She brought her notebook to each meeting, jotting down successes and struggles. She gently guided, never lectured. One day, Vladimir brought his radio and played soft music during the session. People stretched in their chairs, laughed at each other's stiff movements, and clapped for the effort. They had become more than neighbors. They were a club, a circle, a team. And they called themselves, proudly, the Morning Ritual Club. For many, it was the first time in years they felt part of something. Not just alive, but awake. The changes came slowly, but steadily. Like spring thawing a long frozen landscape, the residents began to bloom in small but remarkable ways. At first, it was the physical wins. Clara Andreevna, who had once gripped the stair rail like a lifeline, now walked to the corner store without needing to pause and catch her breath. She waved proudly to Eleonora one morning, calling out, didn't grab the railing once. Yakov Petrovich reported that his usual dizziness after getting out of bed had vanished. "My head feels clearer. And I don't bump into the hallway dresser anymore, he chuckled, rubbing a fresh bruise-free elbow. Even Nikolai Ivanovich, who once dismissed Eleonora's advice with grumbles and rolled eyes, now reminded others to drink water before their coffee. These old bodies just need a little morning maintenance, he joked one afternoon, raising his glass of lemon water in a mock toast. Then came the emotional victories. People smiled more, talked more, stayed longer at the meetings. The atmosphere in the building began to shift from silence and sighs to chatter and laughter. The club meetings became the highlight of the week. Sometimes they'd share progress. Other times, they'd swap tips, swap recipes, or do light chair exercises together. Elena even introduced breathing techniques one session, which turned into a room full of seniors breathing in unison, eyes closed, smiles on their faces. But the most unexpected shift came from outside. The neighborhood doctor, a brisk woman named Dr. Zarina, paid a surprise visit one afternoon. "I came to see what all the fuss is about," she said, standing at the doorway of the common room as the members finished their stretches. "The fuss?" Eleonora asked, startled. The doctor nodded. "I've had fewer calls from this building in the past 2 months than I had in a single week last year. Fewer dizzy spells, fewer falls, fewer digestion complaints. I thought my phone was broken." Everyone laughed, but there was pride in their eyes. "Well," Eleonora said with a modest shrug, "we just decided to treat our mornings with more care. Seems like it's working." Dr. Zarina walked around the room, listening, asking questions, even taking notes. By the end of the hour, she was thoroughly impressed. "This is preventative health at its best," she said, before turning to Eleonora. "You've created something very real here." Eleonora flushed with quiet joy. It hadn't been the plan. She didn't set out to lead a movement. She just wanted to feel better and maybe help a few others do the same. But now, the ripples were spreading. What started as a personal response to a friend's death had turned into a shared transformation, and as more neighbors joined the club, more stories poured in. "I sleep better. I feel more balanced. I don't dread the mornings anymore." There were small victories, but together they added up to something powerful. And everyone knew they were just getting started. By early spring, the Morning Ritual Club had become more than a gathering. It was a way of life. What began with a few glasses of water and cautious stretches had turned into a full-blown transformation in how its members approached their days. And for Eleonora, the biggest realization came one sunny afternoon while watering her window plants. She looked around her little apartment, the same one she'd lived in for decades, but it felt different now. Lighter, brighter, more alive. That's when it hit her. The change wasn't just in the morning. It was spreading into every hour that followed. At the next meeting, she posed a question to the group. "What do you all do after your morning ritual? How do you carry that energy into the rest of your day?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then Clara Andreevna raised her hand. "Well," she began, "I used to eat lunch in front of the TV. Now I eat at the table with music playing. It feels more mindful, I suppose." Vladimir nodded. "I used to nap right after breakfast. Now I go for a walk, even if it's just 10 minutes. Gets my blood flowing." Even Shy Tamara from the 5th floor chimed in. "I started stretching in the afternoon too. Just a few minutes, but it helps." Encouraged, Eleonora brought a new idea to the next session, whole day wellness. She drew a big circle on the whiteboard and divided it into parts: morning, afternoon, evening, night. Together, they filled it with ideas. Morning: wake gently, hydrate, eat, stretch. Afternoon: short walk, healthy lunch, a little rest. Evening: light dinner, calming tea, no heavy TV. Night: gentle breathing, gratitude journaling, early to bed. They weren't rules, just possibilities. But the members took to it with enthusiasm. Some began journaling. Others started keeping a hydration log. A few even coordinated lunchtime walks together, slow-paced, with plenty of stops to admire blooming lilacs and chat about the past. Nikolai began experimenting with cooking again, swapping out fried eggs for oatmeal and sharing his culinary discoveries in mock-serious tones at the meetings. "I've reinvented breakfast," he declared, proudly holding up a banana. Soon, the common room's bulletin board was full: recipes, sleep tips, simple exercises, even poems. Vladimir posted a hand-drawn chart tracking his movement minutes. Tamara added photos of flowers she found on her walks. What was happening couldn't be summed up in medical terms alone. It was connection, mindfulness, self-respect, and joy. Eleonora stood back and watched it unfold with quiet wonder. She'd thought they were building better mornings, but in truth, they were building better lives, one habit at a time. And she couldn't help but think of Maria again, of how one tragic morning had sparked all of this, how her friend's silent passing had awakened something powerful in the living. The mornings were still the starting point, but now the ripple reached far beyond, into the hours that followed, into every part of the day, into life itself. The date had crept up quietly like a shadow at dusk. 1 year since Maria Petrovna's passing. Eleonora felt the weight of it before she even looked at the calendar. The memory was etched into her like a quiet scar, one she didn't flinch from but never quite forgot. She mentioned it during that week's meeting, voice calm but purposeful. Next Thursday marks a year since we lost Maria. I was thinking, maybe we could honor her, not with sadness, but with gratitude. The room was still, even the chatterboxes were silent. I never knew her well, Clara said softly, but I feel like I owe her something. If not for what happened, we might all still be rushing through our mornings in the dark. Everyone agreed. So the following Thursday, the club gathered in the courtyard garden, a soft breeze brushing the budding trees. Each member held something small, flowers, a candle, a note, a ribbon. Eleonora brought a framed photo of Maria, the one where she's laughing with her cat curled in her lap. They placed the items on a bench beneath the lilac bush Maria had once admired. One by one, the members shared what the club had meant to them. Nikolai, whom now walked taller and breathed easier, cleared his throat and said, Maria didn't know it, but she started a whole movement. Clara added, this club changed my mornings and my afternoons. I don't feel old anymore. I feel aware. Even Vladimir, gruff and usually allergic to sentiment, gave a small nod. She reminded us to slow down, to pay attention. That's worth remembering. Tamara, tearful but smiling, simply said, because of her, I have people again. Eleonora stood last, holding the photo gently. Maria was a dear friend, she began, and her death was a shock. But it also lit a spark. It reminded me that we can't take our days for granted, not how we begin them, and not how we live them. She paused, letting the breeze carry the silence for a moment. I think she would have liked this club. And she would have laughed at the idea of us all sipping lemon water and stretching like ballet dancers. Laughter rippled through the group, light and loving. And that's exactly why we'll keep going, she finished. To help others before it's too late, and to keep her spirit moving forward, one gentle morning at a time. They ended the gathering with a moment of quiet reflection, no formal prayers, just presence. Later that week, the group voted to expand the club's reach. We should share this, Clara insisted. Other seniors need these tools, these reminders. So they began creating small informational booklets, one on safe waking routines, one on hydration, one on mindful eating. Eleonora oversaw the content. Nikolai helped edit the wording so it doesn't sound like a hospital brochure. Vladimir insisted on adding a movement tracker page. They printed 20 copies to start, then 50. The booklets were placed in the clinic, at the library, and in nearby apartment buildings. Each one was titled simply, Morning Ritual, Gentle Habits for a Stronger Day, inspired by the memory of Maria Petrovna. And just like that, Maria's legacy stretched further than anyone had imagined. The invitation came in a pale blue envelope, sealed with care and addressed in delicate handwriting. It was from the director of the local senior center, a place Eleonora had only heard about but never visited. Inside, the message was simple. We've heard about the Morning Ritual Club. We would be honored if you could share your story and your methods with our community. Would you consider giving a short talk? Eleonora read the letter twice, unsure whether to smile or panic. She had never given a talk in her life. Her voice, though calm and confident among her neighbors, suddenly felt too small for a stage. But then she thought of Maria, of the bench beneath the lilac bush, of the booklets that were already helping others. She took a deep breath. then nodded to herself. Yes, she whispered, it's time. The morning of the event, she dressed carefully in her best blouse, pinned on her favorite brooch, a small silver dove, and tucked the first morning ritual checklist into her handbag. The center was bustling when she arrived. Dozens of seniors milled about, sipping tea, browsing pamphlets, chatting softly. When the director greeted her, Eleonora expected a small room with a few curious faces. Instead, she was led into a sunny hall filled with rows of chairs and people. At least 40, maybe 50, all waiting. Nervousness prickled at her neck. But then, in the front row, she spotted familiar faces: Nikolai, Clara, Vladimir, Tamara, and several others from the club. They smiled and waved as if to say, "We've got you." So she stepped up to the microphone, took a breath, and began. "I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm just someone who lost a friend." She told them about Maria, about the morning she overheard a doctor's quiet conversation, about the glass of water that changed everything, about the neighbors who said yes, one by one, to trying something new, something gentle, something important. She showed them the checklist, told stories of the club's victories: less dizziness, fewer falls, better moods, stronger connections. The audience nodded, some scribbled notes. Others just sat still, listening with quiet reverence. When she finished, the applause surprised her. Afterward, people approached her one by one, asking questions, sharing their own stories, requesting copies of the booklet. A woman in her 80s clutched her hand and said, "You've reminded me that it's never too late to care for ourselves." As Eleonora left the center, a sense of calm washed over her, not pride, but purpose. The kind that comes when you realize your life has rippled into the lives of others. What began with a single tragedy had become a seed of change. And now it was spreading, one glass of water, one mindful stretch, one quiet conversation at a time. She walked home with a light step, the late afternoon sun warming her back. Her phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "They want us to come back next month. Maybe we can do a workshop." Eleonora smiled. A workshop? Imagine that. The world had not changed overnight, but something had shifted. And for dozens of seniors, morning would never be the same again.